The click of the lock, the cold metallic finality of it, still echoes in my memory like a gunshot. It wasn't just the sound of a door being secured, it was the sound of my life shattering, of a bond irrevocably broken. I stood on the porch of the house I'd grown up in, the house that was supposed to be my sanctuary, and stared at the gleaming new hardware. My key, the one I'd carried for years, was useless. It was a late afternoon in early spring. The air still held a crisp bite, but the chill that truly pierced me was the one emanating from within those familiar walls. "You have no home here, Alara." My mother's voice, sharp and devoid of any warmth, cut through the quiet afternoon. She stood framed in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of cold triumph. "Consider yourself disowned. Don't ever come back." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. Disowned by my own mother. The woman who had given birth to me, raised me, was now casting me out onto the street with less remorse than she'd show a stray dog. My mind reeled, trying to grasp the enormity of what was happening. Just hours ago, I'd been inside, packing a small bag for an overnight stay at a friend's, a temporary escape from the escalating tension that had become a constant companion in our home since my father passed away 6 months prior. Now, there was no home to return to. My childhood, though not idyllic, had always been anchored by the presence of my father. He was the quiet strength, the steady hand, the one who buffered me from my mother's more volatile nature. Mom, a woman of formidable will and even more formidable opinions, had always been prone to dramatic declarations and emotional outbursts. But Dad had a way of calming the storms, of making her see reason, or at least diffusing the immediate threat. He was my protector, my confidant, and then he was gone. A sudden, cruel heart attack that left a gaping hole in our lives and, unbeknownst to me at the time, removed the last barrier between me and my mother's unchecked control. After Dad's death, the house became a tomb of unspoken grief and simmering resentment. Mom seemed to channel her sorrow into a suffocating need for control, and I, still reeling from the loss of my anchor, became her primary target. Every decision I made, every interaction I had, was scrutinized, criticized, and often condemned. I was 26, working a demanding but not particularly high-paying job, and still living at home, primarily to help my mother with expenses and to keep her company in her grief. Or so I thought. In hindsight, I was more of a live-in emotional punching bag. Our arguments grew more frequent, more vicious. She'd accuse me of not caring enough, of being selfish, of trying to replace my father. I'd try to defend myself, to explain my own grief, to assert my nascent independence, but it was like talking to a brick wall. The final straw, the spark that ignited this particular bonfire, was a seemingly trivial disagreement about a shared utility bill. I'd pointed out that she'd used an exorbitant amount of electricity that month, far more than usual, and suggested we look into it. Her face had contorted into a mask of pure fury. "How dare you question me? This is my house, my money. You are a guest here, a burden." I'd tried to explain, to de-escalate, but her words, laced with venom, cut deeper than ever before. I retreated to my room, the familiar ache in my chest returning. I called my friend, Sarah, and told her I needed a night away. I packed a small bag, intending to return the next day once things had cooled. I never imagined that when I left, I'd be walking out of my home for good. Now, standing on that porch, the cold wind biting at my exposed skin, I felt a primal fear grip me. Where would I go? I had very little savings. My job barely covered my own expenses, let alone rent in our expensive city. My car was old and unreliable. Panic began to set in, a cold, creeping dread that threatened to consume me. I tried to reason with her, my voice trembling. "Mom, please, where am I supposed to go? This is my home too." Her laughter, a harsh, brittle sound, was my only reply. "Your home? You own nothing, Alara. Not a single brick, not a single shingle. This is my house. Now leave before I call the police." I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the humiliation burning my cheeks. My eyes stung with unshed tears, but I refused to let her see me cry. Not now, not ever again. I turned and walked away, my shoulders hunched against the cold, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. Each step felt like a betrayal, each gust of wind a reminder of my newfound homelessness. I had nowhere to go, no one to truly turn to. The friends I had could offer a couch for a night or two, but not a permanent solution. I drove aimlessly for a while, the gas gauge slowly ticking down, my mind a whirlwind of anger, despair, and a burgeoning offense of injustice. I ended up at Sarah's apartment, collapsing onto her sofa, the story tumbling out in a torrent of choked sobs and furious accusations. Sarah, ever the loyal friend, held me, let me cry, and then, her practical mind kicking in, began to brainstorm. This isn't right, Alara. She can't just kick you out like that, especially if, well, didn't your dad always say he wanted to make sure you were taken care of? Her words sparked a tiny flicker of hope, a memory of my father's quiet assurances. Dad had always been meticulous about paperwork, about making sure everything was in order. He'd often said, "I want to make sure you and your mother are secure, no matter what happens to me." But secure how? I'd always assumed that meant life insurance, maybe a small inheritance, not a direct claim to the house itself. The next few weeks were a blur of desperation and tentative steps. I couch-surfed between Sarah's and another friend, Alex's, feeling like a perpetual burden. I worked extra shifts, scrimped on every penny, but the thought of affording my own place felt impossibly distant. The humiliation of my situation was a constant companion. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly alone. My mother made no attempt to contact me, no apology, no softening. It was as if I had ceased to exist. This emotional vacuum, this complete lack of maternal care, began to solidify a cold resolve within me. One evening, while staying at Alex's, he casually mentioned something that would change everything. You know, my grandpa had a similar situation with his sister. After his dad died, she tried to kick him out of the family home. Turns out, his dad had put his name on the deed years ago, just to avoid probate or something. She had no idea. He ended up getting half the house. The words hung in the air, electrifying me. My father, his meticulous nature, his desire for my security. Could it be? Could he have done something similar? My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a long shot, a desperate hope, but it was a hope nonetheless. I spent the rest of the night poring over property law websites, trying to understand the intricacies of deeds, joint tenancy, and inheritance. The legal jargon was daunting, but one phrase kept jumping out at me: joint tenancy with right of survivorship. If my father had put my name on the deed with his, upon his death, my share would automatically become mine, bypassing his will and any claims my mother might have to it. It was a long shot, but it was my only shot. The next morning, armed with a fragile but growing determination, I called a local legal aid office. I explained my situation, the cold dismissal, the changed locks, and my burgeoning suspicion about the deed. The lawyer I spoke with, a kind but no-nonsense woman named Miss Davies, listened patiently. "It's certainly possible, Alara," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "Many parents do this for various reasons: estate planning, tax benefits, or simply to ensure a child's future. We'll need to do some digging. The first step is to obtain a copy of the property deed. Do you know where your father kept his important documents?" My stomach clenched. My father's office, his sanctuary, was now my mother's domain. Accessing anything there would be a monumental task, likely impossible. But then I remembered. Dad had a safety deposit box at the bank, a small one he'd mentioned to me once, saying it held important family papers. He'd even told me the bank and the key's location, just in case. A small, almost forgotten detail, now a beacon of hope. Retrieving the key was an exercise in covert operations. I knew my mother had a habit of leaving her purse on the kitchen counter when she went out for her morning walk. I timed it perfectly. My heart was pounding like a drum as I slipped back into the house, through the back door, which I knew was often left unlocked, a small oversight in my mother's otherwise ironclad security. The house felt alien, charged with her absence. I crept into her bedroom, found her purse, and with trembling fingers, located the small, ornate key that I recognized from my father's keyring. I snapped a quick photo of the address of the bank branch she used, then replaced the key and purse exactly as I'd found them. My escape was as silent as my entry. I felt like a criminal, but a criminal with a righteous cause. The bank visit was nerve-wracking. I presented my father's death certificate, my ID, and explained I was a beneficiary. To my immense relief, the bank manager, after some verification, allowed me access. Inside the box, nestled amongst old bonds and a few dusty photos, was a folder labeled Property. My hands shook as I pulled out the deed, and there it was, my father's name, and directly beneath it, in clear, undeniable script, Ilara Marie Peterson as joint tenant with right of survivorship. A gasp escaped my lips. Tears, hot and stinging, finally spilled down my face. Not tears of sorrow, but of profound relief, of vindication. My father, even in death, had protected me. He had seen, he had known. My mother's cruel words, her absolute certainty that I owned nothing, were a lie. I owned half of that house, half of her house. I walked out of the bank with the deed clutched to my chest, a new strength flowing through me. The despair that had dogged me for weeks began to recede, replaced by a cold, unwavering resolve. I called Miss Davies immediately. "I have it," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I have the deed. My name is on it." Miss Davies was calmly pleased. "Excellent, Ilara. This changes everything. Your mother's actions constitute an illegal lockout and an attempt to unlawfully dispossess you of your property. We have a strong case." The legal process was slow, methodical, and emotionally draining. Miss Davies explained that we would first send a formal letter, a notice of my legal claim, and a demand for access to the property. This was the first shot across the bow. I imagined my mother's reaction, and a grim satisfaction settled in my heart. She had wanted to hurt me, to make me feel worthless. Now I had the power to hurt her back, legally and irrevocably. The day the letter was delivered was etched in my mind. I didn't see it, but I imagined the courier, the official envelope, my mother's initial confusion turning to disbelief, then incandescent rage. My phone, which had been silent for weeks where my mother was concerned, suddenly exploded with calls and furious texts. "What is this nonsense, Ilara? Are you trying to steal from me? You are a greedy, ungrateful child. I will never let you have a penny." I didn't answer. Miss Davies had advised me not to engage directly, to let her handle all communication. It was agonizing hearing her vitriol, knowing the pain I was causing, but the image of her smug face on that porch telling me I had no home fueled my resolve. This wasn't about greed, it was about justice. It was about standing up for myself against a lifetime of emotional manipulation and a final, devastating act of betrayal. The next step was mediation. My mother, still convinced she was in the right, refused to believe that I had any legal standing. She arrived at the mediation session flanked by her own lawyer, a slick, expensive-looking man who clearly underestimated me. My mother's face was a thundercloud. She wouldn't even look at me directly, addressing her lawyer in clipped, angry tones. Miss Davies, however, was a force of nature. She presented the deed, laid out the legal precedents, and calmly explained the implications. The other lawyer, initially dismissive, grew increasingly uncomfortable as Miss Davies dismantled his client's position piece by piece. My mother, seeing her lawyer's growing unease, started to unravel. She began to shout, to accuse, to cry dramatic tears, painting herself as the victim of a conniving, ungrateful daughter. It was a familiar performance, one I'd witnessed countless times growing up, designed to evoke sympathy and deflect blame. But this time, it didn't work. The mediator, a stoic woman with years of experience, was unmoved. She patiently explained to my mother that the law was clear. I was a legal co-owner of the property. Her changing the locks and denying me access was illegal. My mother had two choices: either allow me back into the house as a co-owner, or we would proceed to court, where a judge would likely order the forced sale of the property and an equitable division of the proceeds. The second option would mean hefty legal fees for her and the loss of the family home she so fiercely guarded. The color drained from my mother's face. The reality of the situation, the cold, hard facts of the law, finally began to sink in. Her lawyer, looking defeated, advised her to consider the options carefully. The room fell silent, heavy with the weight of her decision. I watched her, a strange mix of sadness and satisfaction swirling within me. This was the woman who had nurtured me, yes, but also the one who had tried to break me. And now I was breaking her carefully constructed world. After a tense, agonizing hour, my mother, through her lawyer, reluctantly agreed to a settlement. She would buy out my share of the house. It was a substantial sum, enough to put a significant down payment on my own apartment and provide me with a much-needed financial cushion. The terms were clear. She would have 6 months to secure the funds, and if she failed, the property would be listed for sale immediately. Leaving that mediation room, I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, but also an exhilarating liberation. I had won, not just financially, but emotionally. I had stood my ground, asserted my rights, and reclaimed my dignity. The process of getting the money, of waiting for her to come up with it, was another period of intense anxiety. I knew she resented every penny, every moment she had to acknowledge my legal claim. But I held firm, supported by Miss Davies, who ensured every deadline was met. 6 months later, the funds were transferred to my account. I stared at the numbers on the screen, a testament to my father's foresight and my own resilience. It wasn't a victory without cost. The relationship with my mother was irreparably severed. We never spoke again, not directly. Our last interaction was through lawyers, a transaction of money for silence. My father's side of the family, aware of the situation, mostly sided with me, offering quiet support and understanding. My mother's side, ever loyal to her dramatic narratives, saw me as the villain, the greedy child who took advantage of her grieving mother. But I no longer cared. I used the money to buy a small, cozy apartment in a neighborhood I loved. It was modest, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every painting on the wall was chosen by me, for me. There were no ghosts of past arguments, no suffocating expectations, no fear of being cast out. It was a space of peace, of safety, of true belonging. It was, finally, home. Sometimes I drive past the old house. It looks the same, outwardly unchanged. But to me, it's a monument to a battle fought and won. It reminds me that true strength isn't about control or cruelty, but about resilience, about knowing your worth, and about fighting for what is rightfully yours. My mother thought she had disowned me, stripped me of everything. But in her attempt to erase me, she inadvertently gave me the greatest gift, the freedom to build my own life on my own terms in a home that truly belonged to me.